Hello, and welcome back to Chords and Queens, the podcast dedicated to celebrating and amplifying the extraordinary work of female composers and musicians throughout history. I'm your host, Jennifer Athen, and I created this show because these remarkable artists and their groundbreaking works deserve to be heard, studied, and celebrated. Each episode will explore the lives, music, and lasting impact of the women who shaped the world of classical music. And today, we're talking about Laufey. When you think of classical music breaking barriers, you might picture a woman conducting a major orchestra, or a composer premiering her symphony at Carnegie Hall. But what if I told you that one of the most important classical musicians of our time is also topping jazz and pop charts, selling out venues worldwide and inspiring a generation of young women to pick up the cello and fall in love with a different, jazzier kind of music instead. Today we're talking about the person that is doing just that, and her name is Laufey. But internationally, a lot of people also pronounce it Laufey. But I will try my best to pronounce the proper Icelandic version. But if you've listened to this podcast before, you know my pronunciations aren't always the best. But Laufey is a singer, songwriter, and classically trained cellist who's redefining what it means to be a classical musician in the 21st century. Her full name is Laufey Lindbing Jónsdóttir, and again, forgive the pronunciation if it's absolutely entirely wrong. Was born on April 23rd, 1999, making her a Gen Z baby. She was born in Reykjavik in Iceland, and her family background is a mix of cultures, as her father is Icelandic and works in finance, while her mother is Chinese and is actually a classically trained violinist herself. So music obviously runs in the family, and actually her grandfather was also pretty musically gifted and was a well-known violin teacher at the Central Conservatory of Music in Beijing. Laufey has often credited him and her mother for sparking her love of music, but her mother and grandfather aren't the only musical ones, as Laufey's twin sister Junia is also an incredibly talented violin player, as well as being just a funny and a quite iconic person herself. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you should go and watch some of her TikTok videos that she's made over the years because they're quite comical. And actually there's a few good compilations of funny Junia moments, and I really recommend checking them out because basically she has just great sisterly banter and I'm so here for it. It would appear that Laufey's musical talent was crafted and nurtured when she began piano lessons at just 4 years old and picked up the cello by age 8. She eventually graduated from the Reykjavik College of Music in 2018, where she also studied voice. Her musical talent was evident and clear early on when, at just 15 years old, she performed as a cello soloist with the Iceland Symphony Orchestra, and around the same time she also stepped into the spotlight on television when in 2014 she was a finalist on The Island Got Talent, and the following year she actually competed on The Voice Iceland, making it all the way to the semi-finals as the youngest contestant in the show's history. After high school, both she and her twin sister Junia were accepted to the University of St Andrews in Scotland, and while Laufey originally thought she might study economics, she chose a different path, moving to the United States to attend Berklee College of Music on a presidential scholarship, and she graduated from the school in 2021. Now, Laufey first started gaining attention in 2020 through social media, posting and uploading music performances from her bedroom, and this is actually where I first came across her, because whilst I was doom scrolling and in between the what I eat in a day videos and what's in my bag posts, up pops this buttery smooth voice accompanied by a cello of all instruments, which is actually quite unusual in itself. But she was so captivating. And with social media, you're so used to seeing the same generic videos over and over again, but Laufey was like a diamond in a sea of stones, if that's a saying. I'm now making it a saying. And her voice, this gentle, timeless, elegant voice mixed with a touch of nostalgia, stood out immediately. She describes her music as modern jazz pop, but really I sometimes think it's its own genre, that it's a meeting point of this rich classical sophistication and training, jazz phrasing, and that all mixed in together with this incredible pop catchiness. But how did she get to where she is? So let's travel back a few years, and it's April 2020. The world is shutting down, everyone's stuck at home baking bread and learning TikTok dances, and Laufey decides to casually release her very first single, Street by Street. And guess what? It immediately shot to #1 on Icelandic radio, which is not bad for a debut, right? While the rest of us were still figuring out how to make sourdough bread, Laufey was literally topping charts. Fast forward 1 year later to April 2021, and she releases her very first EP called Typical of Me, which in a very cute way she actually refers to it as her little baby. And honestly, it makes sense because most of the songs were written in her room, which gives the whole project that dreamy, late night student with big dreams kind of vibe. And the EP featured Street by Street plus 6 other tracks, including her gorgeous rendition of I Wish You Love, which Rolling Stone singled that one out for praise, and American Songwriter loved the EP so much they put it on their Best Albums of 2021 list. But Laufey wasn't just putting out records, she was amassing a dedicated audience on social media that was obsessed with her ode to the old-fashioned, as well as being in awe of her musical talent. On TikTok, she began posting covers of jazz standards, the kind of songs most people don't expect a 20-something to casually be singing on their feed. But Laufey made them feel fresh and timeless all at once. And the New York Times even described her style as casually elegant, which is kind of the perfect description of Laufey in general. Around this time, she signed a record deal with AWOL, but she didn't stop there. In 2021, she also got herself a radio gig on BBC Radio 3 with her show Happy Harmonies, which ran through the spring and summer and even had a holiday special in December. Each week, she shared uplifting music across all sorts of genres, basically being everyone's musical serotonin boost during a pretty heavy time in the world. She was also becoming known for being an incredible live act. That same year, she performed at the London Jazz Festival, which was another milestone moment. Around that time, she teamed up with the Philharmonia Orchestra to release her heartbreakingly beautiful track, Let You Break My Heart Again. Then, in December, she dropped a cozy holiday collab with British singer-songwriter Dodie called Love to Keep Me Warm. And it's their take on Ted Shapiro's classic Winter Weather, but with a brand new bridge written by Laufey and Dodie themselves, giving it that little sprinkle of originality. By early 2022, Laufey made her debut on US television. In January, she performed her song Like the Movies from Typical of Me on the Jimmy Kimmel Live show, and suddenly she became an international hit with American audiences who hadn't perhaps been exposed to her social media videos or music before. And then came her debut full-length album called Everything I Know About Love, which was released in August 2022. The album was like a diary but in musical form. It was romantic, nostalgic, and a little bittersweet, and it was received with open arms. Critics loved it as well, and fans loved it, and Billboard even had it debut at #1 on their alternative new music artist album chart. And for a first album, that's a real mic drop moment, especially when your music doesn't fit the traditional pop star mold. Moving on to her follow-up album, Bewitched, and this album marked a turning point in Laufey's career. While her debut album, Everything I Know About Love, introduced to the world her soft romantic storytelling, Bewitched felt like a bold expansion, both musically and emotionally. The album really leans even further into her signature blend of classical jazz and pop, with lush orchestrations that highlight her cello and piano roots. It's an album that feels cinematic, as though each track is a little spell designed to pull you into the world of nostalgia, longing, and quiet magic. Thematically, Bewitched is Laufey at her most intimate and confident. Songs like From the Start, which is my personal favourite, and Promise capture the sweetness and ache of unrequited love, while tracks like Haunted and the title song Bewitched showcase her ability to create more atmosphere and mood through these big sweeping arrangements. What makes this album so striking is how it refuses to separate serious music from popular music. Its orchestral strings, jazz harmonies, and pop-friendly melodies live side by side, proving that those genres don't have to exist in isolation. Bewitched also highlights just how deeply Laufey understands the power of storytelling. Her lyrics may be simple, yet they carry the weight of universal feelings, falling in love, waiting for someone to notice you, and the quiet loneliness of a night in. Paired with her crystalline voice and classical sensibilities, the songs have a timeless quality, as though they could exist in a 1940s jazz lounge or in a 2020 streaming playlist with equal ease. The reception to Bewitched reflected this unique power. The album topped the Billboard jazz charts and became a global success, and even won Laufey her first Grammy Award for Best Traditional Pop Folk Album, which was very much deserved in my opinion. More than just numbers though, Bewitched proved that her music wasn't a niche experiment, and it resonated with a wider audience, especially Gen Z listeners who felt seen in her fusion of old world romance and modern vulnerability. With Bewitched, Laufey didn't just enchant her fans, she solidified herself as one of the most innovative voices, reimagining classical and jazz traditions for a new era. This brings us to her most recent work, Laufey's third studio album titled A Matter of Time, which was released on August 22nd, 2025, and really marked a new chapter in her career. While her earlier work leaned heavily on preserving jazz traditions and blending them with classical elegance, this project pushed further into vulnerability and ambition. Produced with Spencer Stewart and Aaron Dessner of The National, the latter is also quite well known for his work with Taylor Swift, by the way. This album is both cinematic and really intimate, balancing these sweeping orchestral arrangements with raw, diary-like confessions. Laufey herself has described it as her most confident and most me record to date, an album about unraveling, confronting insecurities, and finding strength in imperfection. Leading up to the release, Laufey teased listeners with 4 singles, including Silver Lining, Tough Luck, Lover Girl, which is my favorite, and Snow White, each revealing a different emotional layer, from the liberating rush of new love in Silver Lining to the biting breakup energy of Tough Luck. She proved her range as both a songwriter and vocalist, and Snow White in particular stood out as one of her most vulnerable pieces, tackling insecurities about beauty and self-worth with heartbreaking honesty. The album as a whole reads like a concept project, a young woman untangling herself from illusions and relationships and societal expectations while refusing to lose her sense of romantic wonder. Musically, I personally think that A Matter of Time is Laufey's at her most daring. It blends her classical training and jazz background with folk textures, pop sensibilities, and cinematic orchestration. Even the opening track, Clockwork, sets the tone with choral harmonies and jazz-tinged drama, while Lover Girl charms with playful bossa nova type rhythms. Tracks like Mr. Eclectic also show Laufey at her sharpest and wittiest, pairing Latin grooves with lines as biting as they are fun. Forget Me Not, recorded with the Iceland Symphony Orchestra and sung in both English and Icelandic, is one of the album's most haunting moments, while Clean Air offers a lighter folk country palette. And across the record, Laufey experiments with theatrical waltzes and cinematic soundscapes that really push her artistry beyond what fans have heard before. And from what I've seen, critics have really widely praised the album as her most emotionally complex and ambitious release yet, with major publications like Pitchfork noting how Laufey indulges in vintage jazz pop tropes and slyly subverts them, while others highlight her newfound boldness and shedding the image of the quote-unquote soft singer. And fans seem to have responded just as strongly to A Matter of Time, as it debuted at number 3 in the UK albums charts, reached number 1 in Iceland and Ireland, and climbed to the top 5 in Australia and New Zealand. In many ways, A Matter of Time represents Laufey coming into her full artistic power. It's romantic but unflinchingly honest, timeless yet modern, steeped in tradition yet refreshingly daring. More than just an album, it feels like a statement that Laufey, once the shy cellist from Reykjavik posting jazz standards online, has become one of the defining voices of this generation. So why is Laufey important in a conversation about women in classical music? It's because she demonstrates something that often gets overlooked. Classical training is not just a cage, it's a foundation. And too often, people think that a conservatory education or a background in cello or piano locks you into a very narrow path. You either become a professional performer in an orchestra or you teach. And Laufey blows that idea wide open. The other side of the argument is that learning to play a classical instrument is no longer considered cool. And there's definitely been a decline in the number of young people taking music qualification exams. Let me read you an excerpt from the Royal Northern College of Music, which states, Only 5,000 students in England took A-level music in 2023, down 45% since 2010. And the Independent Society of Musicians identified a 36% drop in GCSE level pupil numbers. Maybe the cause, maybe the effect, but it can't be a coincidence that secondary school music teacher numbers also fell by over 1,000 in the same period. Now this data is quite shocking, but perhaps it also ties in with what legendary violinist herself Nicola Benedetti had to say in her interview with The Telegraph, which is that classical music is threatened by young people's lack of basic discipline. Now, do I agree with this statement? Yes and no. I do think we are seeing the younger generation struggle with distractions more than ever before. Social media and game algorithms are designed to be addicting, and I really don't blame a young person for getting sucked into doom scrolling instead of practicing the violin for 5 hours a day. And I don't think it's necessarily young people's fault. And on the other hand, we've seen for a long time that classical music is not always accessible to the average family. Learning an instrument is expensive and time-consuming, and I'm not just talking about paying for music lessons, but there's also the expense of the instrument itself, and even getting your kid to and from music lessons can get expensive. I really think schools offering music tuition for free or very discounted is a must, but not all schools will be able to do that. And I'm not sure if it's the same now, but when I was at school, playing a classical instrument wasn't always considered cool. And let's be honest, when you're in school, all you want to be is to be liked and respected, and you don't want to stand out as the odd one out. And I played violin in school, but whilst I was in my 3rd year of high school, I changed my second study instrument to drums instead of keyboard because I thought it would make me look cooler. And obviously, in hindsight, it didn't, but it highlights what I sometimes think can be the obstacles for young people studying music. That's why I think artists like Laufey are so important. Her story shows us that being classically trained doesn't mean staying inside the concert hall. Instead, she carries all this discipline, rigor, and beauty of that tradition into spaces classical musicians don't often reach. TikTok feeds, late night television stages, global pop charts. And here's the thing, when young people see her doing that, it changes how they view classical music altogether. Suddenly, the cello isn't just this serious instrument you play in school ensembles. It's the sound of heartbreak in one of Laufey's songs. The piano isn't just where you grind through scales, it's a vehicle for intimacy and storytelling through songwriting. This has ripple effects. Every young girl who picks up the cello because she fell in love with one of Laufey's songs is stepping into a lineage that stretches back centuries. Some of them might go on to play in symphony orchestras, others might compose or arrange or create entirely new genres we haven't even imagined yet. And that's how classical music survives. Not by closing ranks and walling off tradition, but by being open-minded, by allowing those traditions to be reimagined and reinterpreted for the present moment. Laufey is living proof that when you give classical tools to an artist who refuses to be boxed in, the results can resonate far beyond the concert hall. And let's also recognize something especially powerful, that Laufey is part of a long continuum of women who have reshaped what classical music can be. Historically, women in classical composition were often sidelined, their works dismissed or forgotten. Today, Laufey is not only refusing to be sidelined, she's refusing to even play by the old categories. She's not just a quote-unquote jazz artist or quote-unquote pop artist, or a classical cellist. She's all of these things at once. That refusal to be neatly defined is quite revolutionary in its own right, because it expands what it means to be a woman in classical music. And the real magic in Laufey's work is that she doesn't reject her classical roots, she expands their definition. She proves that classical training isn't a relic, it can be a superpower. It teaches you discipline, artistry, and technical fluency. But those tools can take you anywhere, whether that's Carnegie Hall, the London Jazz Festival, or a viral moment on TikTok. That's why Laufey matters in this conversation. She's not just performing the music, she's actually subtly redefining how classical music lives in this world. And by doing so, she's ensuring that young women everywhere see themselves not just as inheritors of tradition, but as innovators who will carry that tradition forward into places we can't even predict yet. So, moral of this podcast, maybe stick to your cello lessons and listen to Laufey's new album. No, I'm kidding. It's actually keeping your mind open wherever you are on your journey with classical music. If you're a young girl who's been forced into violin lessons by your parents, but you secretly dream of being a singer-songwriter, perhaps the violin can help you. Or if you've listened to classical music your whole life and consider yourself an absolute purist, perhaps open your mind a little and start expanding your ear to listen to the classical influences of everyday music. Or perhaps just start making classical music feel more accessible. Go to that opera you're too scared to attend because you think it's not for you. You gave up piano at the age of 10 because it wasn't cool, but now you're 40 and wish you'd kept at it. Perhaps ask for a keyboard at Christmas. Overall, I think Laufey is a great example of what the future of classical music can look like for the younger generation. And people of all ages love her because her talent in music is universal, something I think the classical music genre can really learn from going forward. Well, that's all I have for you today, folks, but I hope you enjoyed learning more about the wonderfully talented Laufey. And if you liked this episode, please give us a follow on your favorite podcast platform. And if you also want shorter facts and stories about your female composers, you can make sure to give us a follow over on Instagram and TikTok at Chords and Queens. Thank you so much for listening, and until next time, I'll see you again soon.